All right, we are ready for our final company of the day, NeuroTrack from Richmond, Virginia, if you'd like to make your way to the stage. Technology that helps diagnose Alzheimer's years before symptoms appear, creating the potential to transform the diagnosis of the disease. You have 5 minutes right there. We'll start when you begin.
I want to talk to you today about Alzheimer's disease, a disease so destructive that it causes you to forget how to feed yourself, how to dress yourself, who your wife of 40 years is. This is my grandfather, Max, a brilliant eye surgeon who slowly, painstakingly disappeared before my eyes. Take a moment and look to your left, to your right. It's not just my grandfather. If we don't do something about Alzheimer's disease, half the people in this room will have it by the age of 85. Today, there are a number of drugs on the market that treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. But there are no drugs that prevent the disease from occurring or slow its progression. And it's not for lack of trying. Some of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies have tried repeatedly, but sadly have failed over and over again. And despite the enormous cost of failure, north of $1 billion per compound, these companies continue to try with the hope of reaching the multi-billion-dollar market that these drugs represent. So why are the drugs failing? We don't know if it's the drugs themselves. We can't get there because the trials are flawed. Drugs intended to prevent Alzheimer's disease are being tested on people who are either too far gone or not at risk at all. You see, Alzheimer's disease is a silent killer. It lives in the brain, destroying key memory centers for years before symptoms appear and doctors can diagnose it. And not only are there no early warning signs, there are no early detection tests. So what would happen if we could diagnose the disease earlier? How would that change things? Well, we think the trials would work because the drugs would be tested on the right type of people, those who are pre-symptomatic for the disease but who we know will convert in the future. And with that, we just might get to a blockbuster drug. Our technology was developed at Emory University and studied over a 4-year NIH-funded study. The test looks at the way people experience images, the way they experience these new images, and we track that change and can give a diagnosis. And we've had amazing results, a highly accurate test years before anything else exists in the market. We know with 100% certainty that if you score on the low end of our test, you're on a trajectory for Alzheimer's disease. And we know with equal certainty that if you score on the high end of our test, you're not going to develop Alzheimer's disease in the next 6 years. Our plan is to work with pharmaceutical companies to help them populate their trials with the right type of people and get to that blockbuster drug. And with 100 new trials and 20,000 patients each year, we think that's also an incredible business opportunity. And once that drug hits the market, NeuroTrack will already be there as the proven diagnostic for annual screening of Alzheimer's disease. And with nearly 100 million people at risk in the United States today, even if we only garner a small percentage of that population, that's a multi-billion-dollar market. We've made incredible progress to date. We have working products that are out in some of the country's leading hospitals. We have patents that are filed and pending. We own the worldwide license to the technology. And as I mentioned, we are in Johns Hopkins, Mass General, Emory University, running this test today. I'm Ellie Kaplan. I have a degree from Harvard Business School. I've worked at Goldman Sachs, the White House, the United Nations on some of the world's most complex problems. Our chief medical officer is Dr. Colin McDonald. He's a Harvard-trained practicing neurologist who also happens to be a serial entrepreneur. And our team of scientists are some of the world's leading experts on memory disorders and Alzheimer's disease. We have an amazing team of scientists, physicians, engineers, and proven entrepreneurs. We have a technology that is powerful, proven, and scalable. And we have the passion to make a difference. I can't go back and change the end of my grandfather's story, but we have the potential to change the ending of half the stories in this room. I hope you'll please join me, and let's solve the problem of Alzheimer's disease together. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, let's open it up with you.
I lost my mother to Alzheimer's also.
sorry
It's a
to
very sad event.
Very sad disease.
Is there a way to, how can I take this test? I want to take your test immediately.
You can take our test. Right now, it's at Emory University, it's at Johns Hopkins, it's Mass General in Boston, and I can also get it to you over the web.
Thank you.
Bill?
Just in terms of the fundamental premise of the test, you said with 100% certainty that you could, I believe, predict a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Is it 3 years in advance or 6 years?
6 years in
6 years in advance. And you said there were studies that back that up. So the
Yeah.
test is 100% reliable. There are no false positives, no alternate diagnoses that could emerge from a failure of the test?
Correct.
Okay.
We ran a 4-year longitudinal study at Emory University that was funded by the NIH.
And you have patent protection, it sounds like, or pending on the test itself. How proprietary are these sorts of tests in terms of your ability related to protect your intellectual property here?
So our patents cover the test itself. It covers all of the algorithms. It covers the concept of eye tracking for Alzheimer's detection and dementia. And we're waiting to hear back from them. But the other thing that we have is truly a body of some of the world's leading experts on Alzheimer's disease, both in Atlanta as well as around the country. We're the only ones out there doing this today, and so we are on track to be first to market and really get a huge percentage.
Frida.
Can I ask a couple of clarifying questions about the study? The size, the power, and the endpoints for starters, and then the entry criteria. What are the age spans of these patients, whether or not they have any predisposing risk factors, family history, et cetera? Were they symptomatic, asymptomatic, et cetera?
Right. So the study was run at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center based at Emory University in Atlanta. We had 92 subjects. The age was 70 plus or minus 6 years. 92 subjects, 60 of which were control, healthy, normal. The other were MCI. And for those who don't know, it's mild cognitive impairment. It can be one of the leading preconditions to Alzheimer's disease. So some were exhibiting symptoms and some were not. And we ran a battery of tests on them, including ours, the MMSE. We did spinal fluid taps and some MRI scans.
Keep going.
So I'll keep going, okay.
Yeah.
So what was the concordance with some of the existing tests that you also took? What did that look like, and whether or not?
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we are actually just going back to look at some of the scans and the CSF fluid, but we compared it to the MMSE, and interestingly enough, even those with MCI did not score in a range on the MMSE to indicate that they were on a trajectory for Alzheimer's disease. Our test was, far more powerful, and just MMSE didn't even come close.
And the predictability of this, you said to 6 years, but the duration of the study was shorter than that.
Right.
So
are
you still following patients?
We're still following the patients.
John?
So I didn't see much in the presentation about product. Is this a written product, online product, mobile product?
Right.
And I didn't see anything about the business plan behind this either.
Yep. So there are actually two products. The one that we ran the study on, they're both computer-based visual cognitive tests. The one that we ran the study on has an infrared eye tracking device that's embedded in the computer monitor. So a patient comes in, they're told to sit in front of a computer and do nothing but look at the screen as though they're watching TV. 2 identical images come up on the screen. They're on the screen for a brief period of time. The screen goes dark. 2 more images come up. One is novel and one is from the screen that they've just seen. And this sequencing of images continues for 30 minutes. All the while, the infrared eye tracking device is tracking where they're looking and how much time they're spending on the novel image versus the familiar image. And the theory behind the facts behind the test itself is that one of our scientists was the first to discover that the hippocampus is the first structure of the brain that's impacted by Alzheimer's disease. And one of the processes that's controlled by the hippocampus is something called recognition memory. So combining recognition memory with a human being's instinctive preference for novelty, we were able to develop this test and test recognition memory and their preference to look at new things, and discovered, are able to detect perturbations on the hippocampus far before any, even more invasive type of test. The second product is a web-based test. We redesigned the test so that we can get rid of the need for the eye tracking device. The images on the test are blurred. You control a viewport with a computer mouse, and the viewport brings the images into focus, and it tracks perfectly with the way you would move your eyes without the, if you were using the eye tracking device.
I think the second part of that was the business model behind it.
Oh, the business model. So the business model is to work first with pharmaceutical companies to help them populate their clinical trials and to get to a blockbuster preventive drug for Alzheimer's. Like Mr. Metcalf, we are inundated with requests from people who hear about the test and want to take it. The plan is to go out to general consumers via the physician once we get that blockbuster drug, but we do have a lot of requests to administer the test now.
Is the result of the test actionable for the individual patient? In other words, if I know one way or the other, then what?
Right. So there are a number, as I mentioned, there are a number of drugs that treat the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. We know that the earlier you take those drugs, the more effective they are. There's no preventive drug that you can take today, but you can start some of those medications earlier. But there are a lot of behavioral things that you can do. So there have been a number of studies that have been run on exercise and Alzheimer's disease, and they've found that by exercising every day that you stave off a lot of the symptoms, and it can be very helpful in terms of lessening the condition.
Bill and then Frida.
Just on the business model, just to dive deeper. So this would be reimbursable then eventually once you get through all the trials?
Eventually. I mean, the guidelines for Medicare already exist for a cognitive type of test. But initially it'll be out of pocket while we go through the reimbursement
And have you
process.
estimated the size of that market? What do you think the revenue potential is for the business? Or would you broaden into, would you become a generalized test company? Or would you think in Alzheimer's alone there's enough revenue?
We've been talking to generalized test companies. I mean, the size of the market is enormous. If you price the test at $100 a test, if you gain only 25% of that market, that's a $2.25 billion market on an annual basis. The thing about Alzheimer's is that it is an oncoming epidemic. Today there are 5.4 million people with the disease. By 2050, there are going to be 15 million people with the disease. By 2100, which is in the age of my children's lifetime, there will be 300 million people worldwide with Alzheimer's. That's the entire population of the U.S. today.
Frida.
Two quick questions. One is, what is the current regulatory status, either in the U.S. or outside of the U.S.? And then the second question is, not that Alzheimer's is not enough, but is there any opportunity to expand the technology to things like recognition and autism?
Yep. So first question about regulatory. We don't need to go through the FDA in order to sell to pharmaceuticals, and that's our business model, the first cycle of the business model. While we're selling to pharmaceuticals, we will then begin the regulatory process. But today there's no need to get FDA approval. But we will start that process. It's important for getting reimbursement. And then in terms of platform technology, the answer is yes, and we've started looking at that. We know that there are lots of applications for Parkinson's, for autism. There are, as people with HIV/AIDS are growing older, there's a unique form of dementia that's associated with AIDS. We've started studying how our tests could be applied to identify that form of dementia. So there are a number of different, neuro-based conditions that we could
We got about a minute left. John, do you have one? Then Frida will come back if we can.
We have a question on competition. So there's a company out of Toronto that has a nearly identical product. Probably about 8 months ago, I went through the test, and love to find out how you differ from them. It sounds very similar in terms of what they're doing. And then there's another company that actually was going after this space and that eventually is currently working with the NFL on concussions.
Right.
They found out it was a lot more profitable to figure out what time you get back. So how do you think about, one, in terms of what's the competitive landscape, and should you be in the NFL or some other market?
And do that in 30 seconds.
Okay. So the second part of your question first, we've been looking at concussions. There are applications for this test for concussions. It's an enormous market. We're passionate about Alzheimer's disease, and so we're sticking with that. And I personally think that it's a larger worldwide problem at this stage. And then in terms of competition, we know of the Toronto company. There are a number of companies that are trying to do, that are working on different forms of early diagnostic tests, PET scans, biomarkers, all different kinds of things. But frankly, there's nothing that is anywhere near where our test is.
And with that, we are out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Very good, very good.